Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a quick look at a single-handed arming sword from Angel Sword. Now, if you're not familiar with Angel Sword, can't blame you. They're a little bit of a obscure company, but well-known and tend to bring out a lot of hard feelings one way or another about their products. If you're not familiar, though, I'll try to tell you a little bit about them. Angel Sword is a US-based company, and they make a lot of what I would call artistic interpretations of stylistic swords from history. This would be a European arming sword, or at least an artistic interpretation of one. It doesn't adhere to any particular typology or anything like that. It's kind of a weird amalgam of a rapier and an arming sword with a large crossguard. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure how you would classify it, but the thing I would note is that I intended to do a more robust review, and I'm not gonna, because this one has sold. I was running short of time and money, and, well, in a nutshell, to alleviate the money issue anyway, I put it on eBay and sold it. So I still think it's worthwhile, though, to share some of its features and its build quality, because that might help you understand what you would expect if you ordered a medieval style arming sword from Angel Sword. You can probably find that on Facebook, or maybe contact them through email if you're interested. They are also at Renaissance festivals, though admittedly they do not build a model sword. You won't be able to buy this one, but you could probably have them make you something relatively similar in terms of its characteristics. Generally, it's a bit of luck of the draw as to what they have at the booth at the Renaissance Festival at the time you go, and it may not be something like this, so you'd want to work ahead if you wanted something like this. But if you wanted something different, you would have a better idea of what to expect from the build quality. If I move on, this sword comes with a whopping price tag of somewhere around the ballpark of $2,500 to $3,000, and that's pretty common for the Bright Knight series katanas, at least right now in 2017. Prices might go up or down, but that's the general ballpark they are right now. And at that price point, it's competing with Albion in terms of the high-end mass production manufacturers, as well as custom makers, and there's a myriad of people making custom European-style swords for less than $2,000 with, in my opinion, a better fit and finish quality. Frankly, most of the people that I know that make custom European-style swords don't do it with kind of the aesthetic flair that Angel Sword does. They kind of try to stick towards more historic pieces, but there's a lot of people that are known to do Odin Blades, the John Ledemo. He makes a variety of fantasy pieces that I think the fit and finish quality on are far superior to this. But I'll elaborate on that in just a moment. The thing you should know, though, is it's about $2,500. Angel Sword has a good warranty. They'll sharpen the swords at Renaissance festivals for free. You can also trade it in if this sword isn't, for example, I could bring it to the Ren Fest and get $2,500 credit or something like that toward a sword, and as long as I was spending 20% more, I could pick a different sword. So those are features that you don't get with other people that I would say often go kind of unnoticed, and they should be noted because they are important and they are useful. But that's about it. Now I'm going to get into the sword itself, and I'll talk a little bit about its build quality, and hopefully you find kind of the notes interesting, or at least useful if you were thinking about getting one. So I'll start with the pommel here. The pommel is a kind of large bit of bar stock that looks like it's been routed out. I don't know exactly what to say, but it has a rough finish, and overall what I'll note is that the finish on this is really rough for a $2,500 sword, in my opinion. The finish quality is where most of my griping is honestly going to be. I can understand that it's a fantasy-inspired piece and that it doesn't need to adhere to balance points, or it doesn't need to historically be the same as a particular this or that, but finish quality, when you're charging that much money, I do personally think that there's a level of finishing that should be done, and I don't see it here. Anyway, so the pommel is kind of a bar stock. I can make out kind of routing lines or milling lines around this pommel, and the tooling, this kind of engraving here is done with, it looks like some sort of engraving tool, but it appears very simple in its overall presentation and construction. I'm not overly impressed with how the engraving is done. It's nice, it's cool enough, but not great. There's also these washers that kind of stick out a little bit, and you can see that it overlaps the pommel a bit here. I don't particularly like that. However, the pommel does provide a interesting balance, so it balances just right above the crossguard here, if I can find it. And so the pommel seems very heavy, but it does bring the center of balance really, really close to the guard. And that is one thing that I'm guessing, well, I'll elaborate on the balance in a moment, but it feels very lively in the hand for how large the sword is. As I move up, if I look at the guard, it's almost a rectangular shape. I don't really like it. It doesn't taper, it doesn't swell anywhere. Edge alignment isn't a problem, so I don't have any kind of really practical complaints with it, other than, aesthetically, it just doesn't have the same finesse as pieces that you find from Albion. It's very tightly wound, nothing is loose. There's no gripes about its performance. It does what it's supposed to do. But again, at $2,500, I might expect a little bit more refinement in how the guard swells and tapers, and expect some different risers. It does its job, it feels good, and it's not rough in my hand, and it feels like these ridges would actually feel pretty good if I had it in a glove as well. So functionally, no complaints, but aesthetically, again, finish, I'm not overly happy with. Moving on to the guard, or the crossguard, this is really wide, and that's what throws me off. It's thin and it's wide and it's a big piece of steel, and it's probably extremely functional, but I'm not super happy with it. I usually like, if I look at some of the Albion or the other cast pieces that are out there, they don't look like a bent piece of bar stock, and that's a bit what this one looks like to me. It does have some aesthetic qualities to it, some engraving and whatnot on either side. One looks like it's kind of a hammer marked type thing with a little bit more intention, and the others routed out a little differently. It's nice enough, but at the same time, the overall shape of it is not particularly appealing to me. But again, function-wise, it would catch a blade. It does what it's supposed to do. It's pretty rigid. It has some aesthetic qualities to it. The milling area where the blade meets where the blade is rested inside the crossguard is a little wider. And this is also something I've seen. This is actually one of the best ones that I've seen from Angel Sword. It's about the smallest that I've ever seen. Very often, the milled area where the guard meets the blade is much larger, and there's some spaces. Albion, I think, does a really good job. A lot of companies leave more space in there than there needs to be, but in this case, it's actually not that bad. But a lot of cases, I see it being a little bigger on Angel Swords. Now onto the blade. So the blade has some kind of little aesthetic pieces and a little jimping here on the ricasso. It doesn't have a fuller, but it does have not a diamond cross section. It's almost like a octagonal or hexagonal cross section here. I'm not sure how you would quite do it. There's a large secondary bevel, but there's a large kind of flat space that goes up most of the blade. It's not even 2/3. It comes up nearly to the point is where this kind of flat space begins to subside here. There's this kind of rough kind of unpolished bit to the steel. Now in the flats, I will say that Angel Sword does a great job on the flats of the blade. The flats of the blade are actually really well ground, and I don't see a lot of wiggles, and I don't see a lot of rippling in the surface of the steel. Now I see that more frequently on Albion swords than I do Angel Swords. Their grinding is actually pretty good, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people actually care about that. And aesthetically, this kind of rough bit on the surface is an aesthetic choice, I would guess, and it looks like it's actually reasonably well done. It terminates at approximately the same point, or it looks like the same point on either side. And as an aesthetic choice, it's nice. I do make out some of the grinding marks still, so the roughness and the what looks like it's supposed to be a more mirror polish is not quite finished to the level I would hope, but it's reasonably well done. And there is just a really big secondary bevel here, and on top of that, it's not terribly sharp. So if I try to cut with it, I mean, sufficiently it's okay, but it's not terribly sharp. Most of the time, Angel Swords are what I would call just absolutely stupid sharp, and this one is a little bit lacking. Now that said, you could bring it to a Renaissance festival and have it sharpened for free. It wouldn't cost any money, but nevertheless, it's not extremely sharp at the moment. Though I can't really hold it against Angel Sword. Most of the stuff when I see it at the booth is really stupid sharp. So this might be because it's traveled or bounced around or somehow got duller, but in general they're usually absolutely silly sharp. Overall blade dynamics, it's not a terribly rigid blade. It's a bit flexible. You know, it is still sharp. You know, and it returns. It doesn't take a set or a bend. It's a pretty, it seems flexible and wobbly, but when I try to bend it, it doesn't really bend that much. It's more when I knock it, it has a lot of wiggle to it. The thing that I'll note is that it feels incredibly nimble, and again, that's likely because the center of gravity is very close to the hilt, and that makes it feel like point control, or at least that's an impression I get from having a low center of gravity, is that, or a low kind of balance point on the sword, is that it gives me the impression that I have a lot more point control than I would otherwise. That said, it's probably heavier than it needs to be. This pommel looks like it adds a lot of weight, and I'm guessing that the sword could be lighter, but you would lose a little bit of that point of balance. A lot of angel swords strive to kind of bring the point of balance right towards the crossguard. That's not always right if that's what if you're looking from a historic context. Sometimes the point of balance is supposed to be at a different spot in the blade, but angel sword usually tries to bring it a lot closer to the handguard. Now, there is a scabbard or a sheath. It's a simple leather sheath with some bucklings, some buckles and stuff on here. It does the job, but it's not fantastic. You can see it wiggles around in here, and it does the job. But basically, I think of it almost as a shipping container or something to wear to a Renfest. It doesn't necessarily meet the guidelines of a really high-end custom-made sheath, but it does come with the sword, and most angel swords come with some sort of leather sheath of some type. Overall, though, I think my personal interpretation is that aesthetically, it's just a little bit of a miss. When you're charging this much money, there's a lot of other options out there in the European style sword market, more in my opinion than there are in the katana market. That market has, katanas seem to have a lot of options, but the custom makers seem to charge pretty substantial amounts. I mean, if you're looking for a really high-end custom katana, then you're probably going to spend $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 somewhere in there. You could spend less, but it's a little bit of a stretch. It seems like there's a lot of really talented, amazing craftsmen in the European sword market, and $4,000, lets you work with some of the best of them. So at $2,000, you can still work with a lot of custom craftsmen to really get exactly what you want, and I think this misses the mark in terms of fit and finish a little bit. That would be my personal thought, but it's also something that you can go and buy at a Renaissance festival. You can go, you can handle it, you can feel it, and then on top of it, you can say, I want this, and then walk away with it. And that's not something you can always do. Buying a custom sword is often a bit of a commitment, time and financially. There's a little risk associated with it sometimes if you're dealing with somebody that you're not familiar with, and things can go wrong. So being able to walk away with something is also a bit of a nice thing. So is it right for everyone? I don't think so. Is it right for some people? Sure. I don't really have any beef. The fact that Angel Sword warranties them and that they seem to retain their value doesn't give me a lot of hesitation in saying if it's something that interests you, go ahead. But it does leave some people with some surly feelings. Angel Sword is a company that has a history of, sometimes having some odd sales tactics, and also the owner is known for being a bit of a character, and those are putting things pretty mildly. Angel Sword tends to bring out a lot of hard feelings from a lot of people in the sword community. And if you have an experience, feel free and share it in the commentary below. But in general, if you're looking for a fantasy-inspired type sword and you go to a Renaissance Festival, feel one that really kind of sings to you. I will say that they cut well, but I would say you could probably do better fit and finish-wise somewhere else. Anyway, do I think it's worth it? I've had a lot of Angel Swords personally, so I think I must, right? It seems like I could always find something better to spend my money on, but I've chosen to spend my money several times on Angel Swords. And each one of them has been different and had different dynamic properties, and that's been fun. I've refit and finished a few of them, and they've come out even better than they were. A lot of the fit and finish qualities or issues can be addressed later on through a lot of expense on my own part, admittedly. But I've had fun buying them. I've had fun playing with them and cutting with them, and they've all worked pretty well. But I will admit it's not something I would advocate for everyone. I think it's fun for some folks, but it's certainly not something for others. If you're looking for a tool to study historic European martial arts, I don't think that they're probably the best tool for that study, unless maybe you're an advanced student and you want to play with some swords that have different dynamic properties for whatever reason. If you're looking for something that suits your garb or your Renaissance costume well, and you think one of these does, I don't really have a problem. They seem to resell relatively well. They seem to hold their value. That's one reason I feel more comfortable buying them, is because they're not terribly difficult to sell. So that's one reason I wouldn't say, it's not necessarily the worst decision you can make. And plus, you can change it around. That's something that you don't get. You have to spend a little bit more money, but the trade-in policy is certainly a perk in my mind. But yeah, not for everyone. It seems to be like you really have to like the fantasy-inspired thing, or maybe you just really want to cut with it. Now, I will say, I've remounted some Japanese-style angel swords, or the artistic interpretations of Japanese swords, and they've really come out amazing in the hand, and they cut really well. So, there might be some benefit to doing that, but still, it seems like no matter which way you go, the money that you spend on angel sword could be spent doing other things. And if you're a student or a collector or something like that, it's probably better to go to a different direction. If you just like them, then spend your money on them. If you are a fantasy enthusiast and this one suits your fancy, go ahead. There's nothing inherently that I would say is bad, but just be aware your money can maybe go a little further somewhere else. So that's about all I have for you. I hope this was interesting, or at least helpful, and that's it. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Cheers, and thanks for watching.